Tonight we will travel back thousands of years to the banks of the Nile, to a culture characterised by pyramids, pharaohs and gods that kept an eye on your every action. However, beneath the opulent temples and gilded masks there is a much harsher reality. What would actually happen if you spent a single day in ancient Egypt? That is the question we pose today, because believe me, you will be roasted alive by more than just the sun. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you, and before you settle in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually love what I do here. Seeing who is joining us from around the globe is always exciting. Let's ease into tonight's voyage together by turning down the lights and possibly turning on a fan to provide a gentle background hum. Greetings from ancient Egypt, the land of pyramids, gods, and unrelenting UV violence. The sun is already blazing through your reed hut before you even open your eyes, as if it were trying out to be the merciless sky god. The harsh, relentless heat of the desert is baking everything, even you, and there are no air conditioners, curtains, or shades. You're laying on a linen sheet on a straw mat by breakfast. It's not so much protection as it is suggestion. All those travel films promised you the breeze from the Nile. Yes, it is no longer there. Most likely passed away in 2800 BC. The temperature is flirting with 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 32 degrees Celsius, by the time you stagger outside. Furthermore, it is not yet mid-morning. Not only does the sun shine in ancient Egypt, but it also ruins your linen tunic. Wearing tissue paper in a sauna is analogous to this. Additionally, forget about sunblock altogether. No SPF 50, no aloe vera, not even a floppy hat bearing a beach resort brand. Protective oils were used by the ancient Egyptians, but you won't acquire any unless you're rich or work in a temple. Applying mud or crocodile feces to your body is your best bet because it may prevent you from becoming a human torch. A focus on strength. The stones beneath your feet are hot enough to boil lentils by midday. Shade is a luxury. Trees are not common. On the other hand, you appear as though someone tossed you into a clay oven without setting a timer, so you'd better not complain. You could feel a bit better sheltering behind a mud brick wall, but even that wall is perspiring by now. The sun god, Ra, is observing. Furthermore, the sun in ancient Egypt represented divine authority rather than merely the weather. Ra felt more strong the hotter the day got. In other words, melting is a spiritual complement. In summary, staying hydrated, being humble, and having an unwavering tolerance for feeling like a roast chicken are all necessary for surviving even one day in ancient Egypt. And you're finally getting out of bed, or more accurately your scratchy straw mat this morning. Fortunately, the Nile is only a short stroll away. Before you see the awful news, you can already smell it. Yes, the powerful Nile, the ancient Egyptian life-giver, which is regarded as sacred and the reason civilization exists here at all. Let's face it though, it also smells like a fish market and a swamp had a nasty breakup. Flies, frogs, and other creatures that shouldn't have legs but do so are swarming the banks. You take a bath here. You wouldn't be able to afford soap even if it had been invented yet. Instead, you use sand, the newest cleaning technique available, to lather yourself. Yes, the Egyptian method of exfoliation involves just rubbing gritty grains on your skin and calling it skincare. In the Nile, washing clothing involves smashing them against rocks and hoping that a crocodile won't mistake your laundry for a delicious midday lunch. It's similar to nature's sandpaper, but less efficient. Not to mention the sporadic sewage runoff from upstream, which adds to the entertainment. Even though this river is shared by humans, animals, and the occasional funeral boat, it is somehow regarded as pristine. After scrubbing and rinsing, you feel a little less sticky and just slightly more concerned about leeches. You may be fortunate enough to use a public basin or cistern if you live in a metropolis like Memphis or Thebes, but for everyone else it's either the Nile or nothing, so don't anticipate privacy. Families, neighbours, animals, and the occasional ibis that scuttle about your ankles as if it were paying rent all share this communal bathing area. Jars of water are filled and levelled. Heads up, and before the midday heat turns the clay to toast, carry it back to your mud brick home. It's a spiritual, vital, and somewhat traumatic daily habit. Thus, the Nile is indeed sacrosanct. It satisfies your thirst, cleanses you, and provides nourishment. You've bathed in the crocodile-infested Nile, you've sandpapered yourself halfway clean, and your body feels like a cooked fig. Let's not pretend it's a glittering paradise. It's a combination of miracle and biohazard. The most significant and unglamorous meal of your ancient Egyptian day is breakfast. Let us establish expectations. No fruit bowls, no eggs Benedict, and no iced lattes at all. In ancient Egypt, breakfast was more of a strategic recharging exercise than a gourmet occasion. The main course is bread, lots of it, dense, coarse, and frequently as chewy as a leather sandal, and you either sit on a low stool if you have one, or just squat in the corner like everyone else. Made from barley or emmer wheat, it is baked in clay ovens that the local rats may or may not share. Additionally, don't be shocked if your slice contains sand, not as a topping, but rather as an unwelcome byproduct of the grinding stones. A daily dose of minerals, if you will. The beer follows. Don't get too enthusiastic, though. This craft ale isn't crisp and fizzy. This is a lukewarm, thick and hazy liquid bread that is more like porridge than pint. A medieval smoothie with a subtle taste of sour cereal and survival. It's loaded with calories and strangely fermented. Even kids consume it because it's safer than water. At least the brewing procedure eliminates the parasites. If you're lucky, and we mean extremely lucky, you could get an onion or a few dry dates to go with your carbon foam combination protein, unlike the Nile, which we just talked about, which is essentially a petri dish. This would only happen if someone caught a fish and didn't eat it raw right away. Because it is for them, flies swirl around you like it's a smorgasbord while you eat your rock-like loaf and drink your grain sludge. Keeping your cup in one hand, you swat at them with the other, trying not to think too hard about the fact that this is probably going to be your greatest meal of the day. In ancient Egypt, breakfast was not about taste. It has to do with function. It gives your body just enough energy to get you through till someone hands you another block of bread filled with sand. Bon appétit. You've had enough chunky beer, gritty bread, and sleep to be considered functioning. It's time to get to work. And believe me, unless you're a scribe, priest, or member of the royal family, which, let's face it, you're not, ancient Egyptian labour makes contemporary burnout seem like a spa day. Without an air-conditioned cubicle, coffee breaks, or ergonomic chairs, your job is all muscle and dust, sweat and sand, and there's always a chance that you'll pass out before midday. Congratulations. If you work as a farmer, you will be knee-deep in Nile muck by dawn, pulling weeds or planting barley while being watched by an overseer who appears to enjoy shouting. You will use wooden ploughs, rudimentary sickles, and your bare hands if your back suffers. It is therefore functioning. It becomes even more biblical if you work as a labourer. Imagine walking barefoot up gravel and prayer ramps while carrying many tons of stones for temple construction in the scorching sun. OSHA isn't here, so you trip. The foreman who works on tombs shrugs and has a shattered ankle. That's a whole other level of work. If you ruin a pharaoh's tomb, let's just say that job security may involve a sealed chamber and a curse. You're hammering limestone and carving out burial chambers for people who will get to rest longer than you ever will. You're not exempt if you are a woman. Grain grinding, waterlugging, linen weaving, childcare and field work are all examples of domestic work that involves physical labour. When the baby naps for 7 minutes while you make dinner, that's your break. You eat while moving, you use your tunic to dab at perspiration. You don't slow down since doing so would force you to lag behind. Additionally, if you go behind, you are held accountable and someone else receives your grain quota. No clocking out is allowed. Your boss is the sun. You crawl home half dead, covered in dust, and hoping for softer sandals and a sun that isn't so harsh when it eventually disappears over the horizon. You, God. In ancient Egypt, labour was not just difficult, but also never-ending. Day after day, until your body fails you or your overseer determines you're not worth feeding, it's a full-body dedication to survival. And it doesn't get any worse than that. You might be tempted to complain about anything minor, like, this job stinks, or why am I doing this again, after working tirelessly in the fields or quarry. Stop there. In ancient Egypt, whining was not only frowned upon, but could even be considered treason. Why? For your boss is more than just a ruler. He is God in the literal sense. The pharaoh is not a man who was born into a fortunate family or who was chosen. He is the human representation of Horus, Ra's son, who was selected by the heavens to govern Egypt and preserve the integrity of the divine cosmic order. To put it another way, give thanks to the pharaoh if the river floods nicely this year. If not, you may not have prayed fervently enough. It is not only impolite to challenge his authority, it is blasphemous. A date with a whip, a pair of shackles, or an early descent into the underworld without any of your preferred burial items could result from disparaging him. His face appears on coins, monuments, temple walls, and even bread molds. Rituals involve chanting his name. In each mural, his image is painted larger than everyone else's. That's lore, not artistic exaggeration, and you won't see him at all. The closest a commoner can get is to watch a golden bark float by during a religious festival. Then, he disappears, returning to a palace you will never be able to enter, surrounded by officials, guards, scribes, and enough gold to finance a small civilization. Fun fact, if you are fortunate enough to work on a royal project such as a tomb, temple, or a statue the size of a mountain, you serve with divine joy, or so the state claims. You also believe that it's safer to act as though carving stone for 14 hours a day is an honour than the real thing. Don't even consider rebelling. Pharaohs put an end to rebellions more quickly than you can say dynasty. Ask the most recent community that attempted to evade taxes. Oh, hold on, that doesn't exist anymore. Indeed, the pharaoh is divine, and you are fortunate to be permitted to perspire in his honour. If you thought it was difficult to survive in the sun and get back to work, you'll be surprised to learn that in ancient Egypt, sand was your roommate, co-worker, seasoning and worst adversary. It's in everything. Your food, your bed and your clothes. There's no getting around it. You might be working, praying, sleeping, or just going about your business in the market when all of a sudden a scorching wind blows by and turns your face into an unwelcome gritty exfoliation experiment. First, let's talk about your attire. Linen. It is lightweight, breathable, and just slightly more successful at keeping sand out than a screen door at keeping soup in. It clings to your skin, slides down your tunic, and somehow manages to go into wrinkles you weren't aware were. Good luck with the food. In essence, every bread loaf is a sand trap. Little grit particles found their way into the dough because the flour was ground between slabs of stone. The Egyptians were not merely consumers of wheat. They also consumed their millstones. Ancient teeth remnants are frequently worn flat like river rocks because of this. Imagine filing your teeth every day and chewing your meal at the same time, and don't believe that your home is a sand-free zone. Gaps, cracks, and glassless windows in your mud brick house are ideal entry points for sand carried by the wind. Your bed is essentially a sand hole covered in furniture. Your cooking pots are filled, and your floors are covered. Shoes are not required. You're always one step away from converting your feet into worn-out leather sandals because, at best, the majority of Egyptians walked barefoot. If you do have shoes, they're often simple reed sandals that are stylish, possibly protective, but not at all. Then there are sandstorms, Egypt's equivalent of a divine slap. Abrupt, swirling, blinding. One minute you're chatting with a friend, the next you're spitting dust and feeling as though someone has dumped a whole beach into your eye sockets. Visibility is completely lost, and everyone around you becomes vaguely coughing silhouettes. To put it succinctly, sand is the roommate who never lets up. Every meal contains rice, the silent killer of your lungs, eyes, and self-respect. It's more than just your life's background. You now have it in your body. No, it cannot be removed by washing. Religion isn't just a weekend pastime. It's the operating system for everything, including your employment, nutrition, hygiene regimen, and sleep rituals, all of which are governed by gods who appear to have very particular views. You've already tried it in the Nile, which is likely full of more sand in ancient Egypt. First, realize that there are gods everywhere. There are temples to 12 distinct deities in your town, each of whom is in charge of a crucial task. As if it were a divine Uber, there is a person who flies the sun across the sky. Moon calendars and scribes are under the control of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom. Public relations is essentially managed by the Sobek, a hybrid between a crocodile and a nightmare fuel guard. Forget about individual liberty. Your entire day is focused on making them happy. Get up. Thank you, Ra. Beer spilled. Express regret to Hathor. Stub your toe. Silently curse, or you run the danger of drawing a resentful spirit. You give the gods a small amount of food before meals. You pray before bed that the god of chaos won't suddenly throw your home into existential chaos. Even funerals are multi-day events where the deceased must show their moral rectitude, avoid demons and pass exams or face being erased forever, in relation to the afterlife. It was taken very seriously by the ancient Egyptians. You don't simply pass away and go on. You have to go through a judging procedure where your heart is compared to a feather of truth. Amit, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the legs of your greatest nightmare will devour you if your heart is heavy from deceit, cruelty, or perhaps stealing someone else's goat. Therefore, you're continuously on probation even after you pass away. The twist is that this intricate belief system is consoling rather than discouraging. The Egyptians felt that life was a part of a cosmic balance, and that you had a shot at a blissful eternity with food, family, and possibly a boat, provided you adhered to the rituals and upheld Ma'at, the principle of truth and order. Naturally, gods tended to pay more attention to those who were wealthier. The temples were enormous. Because faith is mandatory in ancient Egypt, priests had great power, and peasants, well, they just hoped the gods were feeling giving that day. It's your travel schedule for the next life, your insurance policy, and your work description. In ancient Egypt, it was essentially Tuesday time to seek medical attention when you stepped on something sharp, were bitten by something strange, or contracted something contagious. Just don't anticipate a sterile setting or a waiting room. A concoction of herbs, spells, and pure hope will be used to heal you. You will first be brought to a physician. They were also among the most developed in antiquity, to be fair. They had medical texts, surgical instruments, and a reasonable grasp of anatomy. The problem is that in ancient Egypt, science was always accompanied by a significant amount of magic. A poultice consisting of honey, mouldy bread, and crushed herbs is presented to you. Mould contains early penicillin qualities, and honey is actually antimicrobial. To be safe, the healer will recite a protective spell before applying it. This is because you never know when your stomach cramps are genuinely caused by an angry god or a spiteful spirit. While someone recite a hymn to Thoth, you can be given a dosage of crushed onions to rub into your scalp if you have a headache. Let's apply cow dung and dates on your chest to see what happens if you have a cough. Eye infection. It's time for a prayer to Horus and a paste made of lizard blood, ochre, and beer. Yes, surgery was performed. Occasionally. No anesthesia is used. Instead, a sharp knife and a companion to support your shoulders as you scream into a mud block pillow are used to drain abscesses, set bones, and sew wounds with linen thread. Not very good at dentistry. By your 20s, your teeth are worn down by all that sand in the bread. You have one choice if you become infected: accept it. 3 have it pulled with something like pliers produced by a low-class blacksmith, or 2 are killed by it. Not to be overlooked are the amulets. If you're having surgery, giving birth, or simply sneezing too loudly, a decent doctor who doubles as a priest will most likely put a charm around your neck. Just in case, an unseen serpent spirit twisted around your spleen is the true problem. Egyptian medicine did have its uses, but for the most part you'd better trust the gods because your bandage is really a prayer. A major twist has emerged. It's surprising to learn that women in ancient Egypt enjoyed greater rights than many women in subsequent societies. They were able to own property, operate businesses, petition for divorce, and even challenge a man in court. It sounds forward-thinking, doesn't it? The legal position may amaze you, but the everyday reality isn't that glamorous, so wait before you pack your bags for a time-travelling female boss holiday. In ancient Egypt, women most likely woke up before the sun rose. You're manually grinding grain with a huge flat stone that gnaws into your back and the wheat. You're a one-woman workforce in linen, so there's no me time, no spa days, and definitely no maternity leave. After that, you have to haul water from the Nile, prepare breakfast, look after the kids, run the household, feed the animals, and assist in the fields if necessary. Giving birth is difficult and dangerous. Yes, midwives are wonderful, but there are no push soundtracks with calming harps, no disinfectants, and no epidurals. You give birth in a heated room with prayers, incense, and, ideally, minimal bleeding. Let's discuss fashion. Although linen dresses are breathable and light, they lack shoes and underwear. The sand grinds into everything, the sun burns your skin, and the bugs treat you like a smorgasbord. Do you want makeup? Fantastic! Cosmetics were worn by Egyptian ladies, but they were made of lead and applied using sticks that resembled eerily toothpicks. Now, things are better if you're fortunate enough to be born into an affluent household. You may become a priestess, manage estate accounts, write, or read. Being born royal may even make you a pharaoh like Cleopatra or Hatshepsut, who ruled with fearsome eyeliner and genius. However, if you're impoverished, your reality is physical even though your position is legal. You labour, perspire, stoop, give birth, bury, and pray. The law does not bind you. Survival does. Nevertheless, it was important that Egyptian women had agency. When they got married, they didn't become property, could speak in court, and kept their inheritance. That's enormous in comparison to many ancient societies. You made it through another exhausting day in ancient Egypt, but while Egyptian women did have rights, that comfort was only found in sculptures and goddesses, not a woman elbow deep in bread while swiping flies off a kid. You dragged your buckets, ate your gritty bread, escaped divine wrath, and possibly even escaped a sandstorm. In ancient Egypt, your true test starts after death. Therefore it's time to unwind, right or wrong. Death does not mean the end. This is only the start of a multi-phase, highly bureaucratic underground journey. Wait till you meet the gods of judgment if you felt that the labour overseer was harsh. Your soul must first declare your innocence before a tribunal of 42 deities in the Hall of Mart. Saying things like, "I did not steal, I did not lie, and I did not covet my neighbour's donkey," while hoping the gods will buy it, is essentially the oldest court deposition in history. Then comes the heart test, which literally involves placing your heart, which is thought to be the soul's seat, on a scale across from my feather, which stands for justice, balance, and truth. You have lived a wicked life if your heart weighs more than a feather, presenting a meat, a hybrid of a hippo, a lion, and a crocodile. All of them are horrifying. You are not arrested by her. You're not fined by her. She consumes your soul, destroying it forever. There is no second chance, no afterlife, only permanent non-existence, which is the worst punishment in a society that is fixated on eternity. And things improve. You can doom yourself not only with deeds, but also with words. One incorrect admission, one line that is forgotten during your judgment, and you're done, spiritually. It resembles an open book exam in which failing would result in being eaten by a hybrid of fabled death. Congratulations! If you pass, you'll be able to enter the field of reeds, a serene, romanticised version of Egypt, where your soul will live eternally with family, friends, boats, and maybe fewer sand fleas. However, the stakes are high. For this reason, Egyptians were fascinated by burial customs, tomb preparation, and magical books like the Book of the Dead, which is a spiritual cheat sheet that contains spells, prayers, and practical advice like, don't insult the crocodile god. Therefore, if you spend your life correctly, the afterlife may indeed be beautiful. Lunch for Amit is your next destination after one expletive and one unpaid temple tax. Rest well. Your whole wardrobe, as well as everyone else's, is composed of this plant-based fabric. If there was one little blessing in ancient Egypt, it was linen. It allows your skin to absorb the intense heat while remaining slightly cool. The good news is that. Unfortunately, that's about as comfortable as it gets. You wear the same clothes every day, regardless of your occupation, farmer, builder, priest or vendor, a loincloth or short white kilt for guys, a straight sleeveless linen dress for women that is occasionally supported by straps. You may have pleats, beads or ornate patterns if you're upper class. Depending on how long it has been since washing day, it is either plain white or somewhat greyish if you are not. And on laundry day, you're washing your clothes by hand in the Nile and praying a hippo doesn't come out in the middle of the rinse. Underwear is optional. Shoes are also optional. Most individuals walk barefoot. Leather or woven reed sandals are only worn by temple priests or on rare occasions. Expect to spend your days with scorching sand between your toes and maybe a sharp rock in your heel, unless you're a member of the royal family. Amulets for protection, necklaces to demonstrate status, and eye cosmetics made from powdered coal, not just for show, were accessories that were unquestionably but primarily useful. It was said to help prevent infections and lessen sun glare. Indeed, in ancient Egypt, eyeliner had a purpose. However, flies, gnats, and mosquitoes don't care how carefully you dress. They view your breezy attire as an invitation as you go about your day, swatting and smearing on scented oils and hoping that your linen won't stick to you like a damp curtain as soon as the sun hits its zenith. Since Egypt doesn't actually have seasons, it's always hot and a little bit colder, your attire naturally doesn't change with the seasons. Therefore, whether it's 110 degrees outside or frigid and only 70 degrees at night, your linen outfit is essentially your year-round uniform. Indeed, Egyptian apparel was much more comfortable and less formal than what the Romans would eventually wear. Don't let the breezy clothes deceive you though, for your life is still filled with heat, sand, labour and insects that don't respect your personal space, regardless of how airy your tunic feels. You've made it through another sweltering day in Egypt, carrying bricks, avoiding sandstorms, and hoping your linen doesn't break apart in the middle of the job. But let's break it down. In ancient Egypt, survival was always transient because, whatever your toughness, you probably wouldn't live past 35. If you survive childhood, which is already a feat given the extremely high infant death rates, you're thrown headfirst into adulthood by the age of 13. Marriage, employment, and raising children all begin early because, let's face it, time is running short. If you acquire a fever, the best remedy is honey, herbs, and praying that the gods don't have other plans for your soul. If you die from heat stroke, an infected wound, childbirth, crocodiles, scorpion stings, or terrible bread, don't use antibiotics. The irony is that Egyptians did not fear death. They prepared for it. They really made better retirement plans than the majority of individuals do now. Rich people commission tombs, which are the antiquated equivalent of 5-star eternity suites. In order to do your duties in the afterlife, you begin accumulating grave goods, jewels, food offerings, fragrances, statues, and even small servant dolls known as shabtai. Consider them to be spiritual interns who work while you take eternal naps. Your body has been embalmed, placed into a painted sarcophagus, and wrapped in linen that has been filled with natural salt and natron. You are buried with a copy of the Book of the Dead, which is more of a magical tour guide than a doom book. It contains instructions on how to avoid being devoured by soul-eating monsters, spells to confound demons, and passwords for the afterlife. Your grave is probably a shallow trench in the sand if you're impoverished. There are no paintings or golden masks, just you and the wind, and your body is wrapped in whatever cloth your family has left over, possibly with a pot or two placed nearby and then covered with earth. The dream of the afterlife, a serene, fruitful paradise known as the Field of Reeds, where you can farm without perspiration, eat without hunger, and ride the Nile eternally under soft sunlight, was clung to by even the poorest Egyptians. In ancient Egypt you will most likely die young, but if you led a good life, prayed correctly, and avoided offending too many jackal-headed deities, you might live forever in luxury. At last you've reached the afterlife, or at least the tomb. You've been blessed, buried, wrapped, and embalmed. Isn't it time to sleep peacefully? Not quite, as even the deceased were robbed in ancient Egypt. Let's begin with a straightforward fact. In order to be carried into the afterlife, tombs are filled with pricey items, jewellery, sculpted statues, chests full of linens, gold amulets, perfumed oils, and for pharaohs, actual boatloads of treasure. However, finding treasure in a tomb is essentially a welcome invitation for a malicious individual with a chisel. Because tomb robberies were so frequent, they became a full-time issue. Pharaohs attempted to combat it by concealing their tombs deep under cliffs, locking them behind trapdoors, and writing ominous curses on the walls such as "May a crocodile devour your soul," or "May a fire snake twist your limbs forever." The curses didn't work, spoiler alert. Nevertheless, grave robbers arrived at night, covertly and with insider information. They were either crooked labourers who assisted in the construction of the tombs or locals. Priests and guards were complicit in certain cases. The penalty for being detected was harsh. Think public beatings, mutilation, banishment, or death. But given the high value of tomb goods, particularly rare incense and gold, the danger frequently seemed justified. The dead don't fight back, after all. However, not just the rich were robbed. Even the tombs of regular people were disturbed. It was nevertheless worth stealing even if poorer Egyptians were buried with a loaf of bread or a little pot of beer for the afterlife. There wasn't much food. Linen was money and tools were precious. Ironically, there were instances where looting tombs was motivated by survival, rather than only avarice. A hungry labourer would break into a tomb for food rather than gold because Egypt saw famines, political upheavals, and invasions. Additionally, some funeral offerings appear more like food than holy items when your kids are starving. Therefore, simply because you're dead in ancient Egypt doesn't mean you're safe. A desperate person with a pickaxe and bad morals may steal your tomb, erase your name, and unwrap your mummy. Only when no one is aware of your burial location can you rest in peace. We've all seen those imposing, enigmatic sculptures of birds, eyes, snakes, lotus blossoms, and men moving sideways as if they were on a fashion runway on the walls of temples and tombs. The hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt are incredibly beautiful and extremely challenging to understand. Try reading them instead of just admiring their appearance. Hieroglyphs were more than just ornamental writing. With more than 700 characters and still expanding, they were a complete writing system. Whole words can be represented using certain symbols. Many are determinatives that elucidate meaning, while others are noises. Because, well, writing the word star with a real star symbol might be too simple, and you can't expect punctuation or spaces. In essence, ancient Egyptian writing was a lengthy, exquisite puzzle with artistic flair, no vowels, and a strong need for context. Oh, and depending on the scribe's mood that day, it can be written top to bottom, left to right, or right to left. The idea is to observe which way the birds are flying. People are facing in the direction you're reading. Read right if they are facing right. Read left while facing left, and good luck learning to write if they're upside down. Commoners weren't supposed to use hieroglyphs. Literacy was uncommon. The percentage of people who could read and write was perhaps 1%. Becoming a scribe required years of rigorous schooling if you wanted entrance. Beginning as a youngster, you would copy countless scrolls, memorize hundreds of symbols, and practice so much that by the time you were 15, your hand most likely curled into a claw. However, the reward is enormous. Scribes were treated with dignity, fed decently, and never forced to carry bricks in the sun. Rather, they penned letters, court documents, tax records, and religious literature. In a world where writing meant power, they were vital to society and shielded from the majority of manual labour. For the rest of the people, scribes reigned in silence from the shadows. Although writing was considered mystical, hieroglyphs were actually thought to possess sacred power. Writing a person's name saved their soul from complete spiritual destruction. Therefore, spelling was very important. Hieroglyphs are therefore more akin to a language Rubik's Cube covered in myth, math, and mystery, even though they may resemble ancient emoji. Lovely. Sure, it's simple to learn, but it's not at all. It is time to pose the crucial question. Would you have survived a day in ancient Egypt after 14 chapters of heat, starvation, sand, superstition, and backbreaking labour? I'm probably not sure, let's be honest. The ancient world, with its gilded tombs, air scented with lotuses, elegant hieroglyphs, gods with animal heads, and a penchant for order and beauty, is an easy place to romanticise. However, beneath the famous landmarks and breathtaking artwork was a harsh reality that only the wealthy could escape. A typical Egyptian day began with a dirt floor, a cloud of flies, and the understanding that you didn't eat if you weren't working. You also had to carry water, live next to bugs, smoke and cattle, and walk barefoot on burning sand. You were concerned about illness, heavenly retribution, and the possibility of a snake slithering into your sleeping mat. You had no retirement plan, no toothpaste, no medication, and if you were lucky, maybe 2 changes of clothes. You lived under a religion that required you to pass a literal divine exam after death in order to enter the good version of the afterlife, a climate that roasted your skin before noon, and a god king who could confiscate your land with a proclamation, not to mention that you were without painkillers, privacy, plumbing, sunblock, antibiotics, and a simple way out. You were either a scribe, a farmer, a labourer, a mother, a servant, or you were dead once you were born into your class. There were no promotions, no changes in your career, and no self-discovery. Despite everything, the ancient Egyptians were not unhappy. They had a strong belief in the beauty of life, their gods, and their destiny. They cherished festivals, family, food, dance, and music. They painted and joked. A modern person without air conditioning, filtered water, Advil, sneakers, and a smartphone would die before the second sandstorm struck. Yet they had enough clarity in their vision of eternity to create stone monuments that still remain today. You wouldn't survive in ancient Egypt for that reason, but since they endured for thousands of years, it's all right, and perhaps it is the reason we continue to discuss them. One pyramid stands out in the centre of ancient Teotihuacan. Its surface is covered in dozens of snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents, rather than serene religious symbols or kind gods. They protrude from the exterior of the temple, as though they are frozen in mid-strike, their eyes wide and their fangs exposed. Often referred to as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, this is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. However, this temple feels distinct from most others that reverently aspire for the sky. As soon as you go close to it, you get the unsettling feeling that it is watching you. The heads of the stone serpents are more than just ornamentation. They served as warnings and representations of divine vengeance, and something terrible once happened beneath their watchful eyes. The last few decades of seen excavations showed something unexpected to archaeologists. Not only were there ceremonial offerings concealed beneath the temple's base, but there were also human remains and more than 200 bodies, many of them decapitated, hands bound behind their backs, of young men and warriors who may have been buried in groups as ritual sacrifices arranged with mathematical accuracy. Some wore jewellery fashioned from jawbones or necklaces made of human teeth, while others were buried with obsidian blades by their sides. They were not just tossed on the ground, they were purposefully positioned in symbolic locations. This was obviously not a mass grave. It was a divine transaction, a message sealed with blood and engraved into stone. What belief system, however, might justify such horror? Who called for the simultaneous taking of so many lives? As you stand in front of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent today, staring at those stone serpents, you're not just looking at art or architecture. It was a theatre of power where rulers combined cosmology, warfare, and fear to maintain control over a city of over 100,000 souls. This ritual bloodletting may have been the price paid to keep the cosmos in balance. You're staring into the eyes of a society that felt it had every right to supply blood because the gods required it. Before the Maya carved their cosmic calendar into stone, there was a city unlike any other in the ancient Americas. The later Aztecs called it Teotihuacan, which means the place where gods were born. When you walk its vast avenue of the dead, flanked by pyramids that scrape the heavens, you begin to understand why. But who were these people who ordered such violence and disappeared without a trace? With a population of over 100,000, Teotihuacan was one of the biggest cities in the world at the time, rivaling ancient Rome, Alexandria and Chang'an in terms of size and power. It flourished between 100 and 250 CE-wide boulevards, gridded streets, apartment complexes, housing, extended families, multi-story buildings made of volcanic stone, and the three enormous pyramids, the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, at its core were all features of this painstakingly planned city. Here's what sets Teotihuacan apart, though. Nobody is aware of its builder. Really, we still don't know who built this place or what their name is. Even what they name themselves is unknown to us. No written documents exist and no stone monuments bearing the names of the kings. Teotihuacan appears to have been a community governed by a council, a theocracy, or something very different from what we think of as ancient authority. And they had enormous power in spite of their anonymity. From the far-off Zapotec capital of Monte Alban to the Maya civilizations of Tikal and Cupan, hundreds of miles away, there is proof of Teotihuacan's supremacy. Pottery designs, murals, obsidian blades, and even political interference. To establish a monarch more in line with their objectives, Teotihuacan agents may have assisted in the toppling of a local Maya king in one instance. However, how did they manage to keep up such a large network? How could a city in Mesoamerica with no known writing system have such power? Their temples were more than just houses of worship, and the explanation might be found in the way they blended statecraft with cosmic doctrine. They served as theatres of ceremonial sacrifice, were instruments of control, and reminded all residents and tourists that Teotihuacan was no typical metropolis. They also coincided precisely with astronomical phenomena. It was the world's axis, a holy machine that synchronized fate, time, and blood. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was located in the center of everything. You have to comprehend the deity before you can comprehend the temple. It was devoted to one of the most mysterious gods in Mesoamerican mythology, the Feathered Serpent, subsequently called Quetzalcoatl by the Aztecs, and Kukulkan by the Maya. However, the Feathered Serpent was already a major, probably supreme celestial force in Teotihuacan millennia before the Aztecs gained control. Here's the conundrum, though. What sort of god is he? A bird and a serpent? Consider that. Slithering through the underworld are serpents. In order to represent death, dualism and rebirth, they shed their skin. By combining these two earthly and sky dwellings, death and life, chaos and order, birds soar high in the sky, closer to the sun, symbolizing freedom, divinity and life, and giving wind. The result was something completely cosmic, something terrifyingly powerful. The serpent with feathers wasn't merely a deity. He was a link between several realms. Numerous depictions of him, including goggle eyes, bare teeth, and plumed headdresses, are depicted in deep relief on the temple's exterior. According to certain historians, these are the actual god. Others propose that their priests or soldiers display their might by donning divine attire. They're everywhere, anyway. These snakebird hybrids cover the temple, giving the impression that the building itself is alive with the presence of God. However, the feathered serpent was more than just a celestial deity. He had a close relationship with sacrifice. The universe was propelled forward by blood. Furthermore, Quetzalcoatl played a far darker role, even if he was thereafter recalled as a kind and enlightening god. At Teotihuacan, he called for sacrifices of life itself, not merely corn or incense. There had to be a trade in order to produce life out of death, but in some traditions he went down into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead and create people. Humans were supposed to reciprocate the god's selfless sacrifice for humanity. Every stone, every serpent head, and every buried sacrifice fed into the temple of the feathered serpent, which was more than just a monument to religion. It was a cosmic engine created to connect the heavens, the ground, and the underworld through ceremony. Teotihuacan worshipped more than only the feathered serpent. The temple of the feathered serpent stood peacefully for ages, a worn, intimidating structure that had been partially engulfed by time. They represented his reasoning, his power and blood, and the most unsettling realities were concealed beneath the surface. Legends were whispered by locals. Until archaeologists made their breakthrough in the late 1980s and early 2000s, no one could have predicted what lay beneath its stratified stones. What they discovered was not only surprising, but also unnerving. Long-sealed tunnels and pits, each containing meticulously organised human remains, were concealed beneath the temple's foundations. These weren't the untidy aftermaths of illness or conflict. More than 200 young men, many of whom were between the ages of 15 and 25, were the victims of these organised ritualistic sacrifices. Some of them wore necklaces made of human jawbones. The hands of others were bound behind their backs. Some were beheaded. It gets darker here. Nearby, obsidian blades, the recognisable instruments of ritual slaughter, were strewn about, sharp and black as night. The bodies were arranged in symbolic and geometric shapes. They weren't laid to rest at random. Perhaps in an attempt to reflect the universe, they were positioned in the cardinal directions of the quadrants. It even mattered how many bodies there were. Death was not the only thing at stake. It was about dying with purpose. The victims were surrounded by offerings, including obsidian blades that had never been used in combat, rare shells from the far-off Gulf Coast, serpents, jaguar bones, and sculptures. This was not a form of discipline. It was a present. These young men, who were probably soldiers, had been chosen to die as part of something greater than themselves, rather than in shame. It's possible that human sacrifice was necessary just to construct a temple. Each layer was only erected after an offering was made, as though each stone needed to be consecrated with blood. Archaeologists found intricate tunnels packed with underworld-related items like mica and mercury, and the lower you go, the more sacrifice you find in one room. The floor glistened like water. Was it a mirror of the night sky? A symbolic entryway to the realm of the dead? As they dug further, it became increasingly apparent that the temple was intended to enclose death rather than on top of it. The stone was not discoloured by the blood. The stone was accidentally intended to contain the blood. It was all for the gods. You'll discover something odd and unsettling if you look more closely at the feathered serpent's temple. It is more than just a piece of scenery. It is in harmony with the cosmos. Teotihuacan was not constructed at random. The metropolis was arranged upon exact cosmic axes. Its central avenue of the dead is positioned 15 degrees off true north. This is not an accident. Rather, it is a purposeful change that may have been made to coincide with the sun or the Pleiades star cluster's setting on particular ceremonial days. This road is locked into a vast cosmic pattern by the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, which is located exactly along it. However, why? For decades, astronomers and archaeologists have argued over what they were attempting to align with. According to some, the temple coincides with the sunrise on the equinox. Others contend that it has a connection to Venus, the planet most revered by Mesoamerican societies and frequently linked to sacrifice, rebirth, and warfare. Even the temple's size seems deliberate. The step platforms repeat the number 7. which is the number of visible heavenly bodies when Venus rose or set, when gifts were made and temples were lit with ceremonial fire. There is rhythm, symmetry, and a remarkable comprehension of cosmic cycles, as well as terrestrial mathematics, and there are additional hints hidden beneath the surface. In 2003, archaeologists discovered a tunnel beneath the temple, not just any old passageway, but a purposefully built underground realm. The tunnel appeared to be made to mimic the universe itself, with mercury ponds, mica-lined walls and powdered pyrite, a sparkling material that would have reflected light like starlight covering the walls. It would resemble a voyage through the Milky Way, a metaphorical descent into the underworld, or possibly a rebirth. Was this temple not only a site of sacrifice, but also a conduit that connected the spirit world, the sky, and the earth? According to some academics, Teotihuacanos perceived time as circular rather than linear. Every sacrifice, structure, and ceremony wasn't a one-time occurrence. It was a part of an endless cycle in which sacrifice fueled rebirth and death led to renewal. The alignments of the temple might have aided in harvest planning, astronomical movement prediction, and, above all, the timing of blood offerings. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was attempting to communicate with the stars rather than only observing them. Beyond its spiritual significance, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was more. It served as a political tool. Its very design was intended to intimidate, overwhelm, and remind all viewers, both foreign and local, who controlled Teotihuacan's power. Just picture yourself standing in its shadow 1800 years ago. As a visitor from a smaller city-state, you would have arrived at the Avenue of the Dead, already in awe of Teotihuacan's sheer size. But when you arrived at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you would be frozen in place as the serpent head stared at you. The square in front of them used to host large gatherings for public rituals as well as celebrations, and their fangs-bared jaguar symbols growled from the stone. Perhaps you will even see a sacrifice. Something important was understood by Teotihuacan's ruling class. Nothing incites terror more than divine anger, and fear is power. They made it very evident that the gods are with us, and that we are not scared to feed them by planning ceremonial killings in the middle of the day, among images of death and cosmic symbols. It wasn't chaos, though. It was theatre. Cosmic myth was transformed into a political spectacle by priests wearing feathered headdresses and masks made of obsidian who would chant, dance, and spill blood. Appeasing the gods wasn't the only goal. It served as a reminder to all onlookers that the city's leaders had direct communication with God. They were the only ones who could call out rain, open the sky, defend the populace, or vanquish their adversaries. Leaders could gaze down on the plaza they controlled, not only the story but the actual location where it took place, thanks to the architecture, which further supported this propaganda from the temple's higher levels. Teotihuacan didn't need to use swords to subdue the strangers, since the people knew their place and looked up at the gods, the rulers, and the sacrifices. It used symbols to win inside. Dignitaries would return home with stories of wonder and fear. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was the loudest voice of all at its height, and Teotihuacan was the beating heart of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood, a city that seemed destined to last forever. They would talk about the feathered serpents, the endless avenues, and the blood rituals that lit the sky red in a world where gods ruled through fear. Around 550 CE, however, something broke and something changed, and the ensuing silence was as cold as the stone serpent heads of the temple. Teotihuacan fell gradually before abruptly. It wasn't a noisy and spectacular event. Decades earlier, there had been indications of strain, that the cosmic engine was struggling. The structures that had supported this great city, centralized power, religious domination, cosmic order, started to crumble under pressure after a protracted period of drought, crop failure, and social unrest. And then the fire struck. In addition to evidence of dramatic damage at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, archaeologists have discovered extensive burn layers across elite complexes, temples, and administrative buildings. The residential neighbourhoods of the lower classes were largely unaffected, which is odd. There was no outside invasion. This was a rebellion, a revolt, perhaps from inside. It's possible that the same people who used to marvel at sacrifices rebelled against their priest kings. There was stillness when the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, which had once represented divine authority, was looted, statues vandalized, fires started, and ritual areas desecrated. Teotihuacan lost its soul, yet it wasn't entirely abandoned overnight. Networks of trade fell apart. The creation of art stopped. The big rites ceased. The governing class vanished. The enigma only grew deeper even if the temple stopped speaking, because its memory persisted even as the city vanished. The ruins of the Valley of Mexico were discovered by the Aztecs when they arrived there centuries later. They were in amazement. They thought this location was created by the gods. They called it Teotihuacan, the birthplace of the gods. Even though they were unaware of its original architects, they created their own mythology around its pyramids and revered it as sacred territory. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not a ruin in their eyes, one of the remnants of divine truth. Ironically, though, the most powerful city of its era, one founded on cosmic order and blood, went extinct without a written record or final account, leaving behind nothing but stone and questions that the gods, it appeared, had been silent about for more than a millennium. Silence, volcanic ash, and layers of dust covered the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Locals stayed away from it. Before the advent of the contemporary era of archaeology and the revelation of its hidden mysteries, farmers ploughed their fields around it, and the world forgot about it. Archaeologists from Mexico started working on Teotihuacan in the early 1900s. They discovered an amazing city that was well planned and far older than the Aztecs. However, the temple itself didn't start to reveal its most personal and terrifying secrets until the 1980s and 2000s, when scientists discovered a sealed tunnel beneath the Feathered Serpent Temple in 2011. It was one of the most spectacular finds ever. It had been purposefully sealed off between 1 and 800 years ago, as though to keep people out of it forever. A cosmic hallway, a symbolic underworld lined with pyrite to resemble a starry sky, pools of liquid mercury and thousands of ceremonial items, including rubber balls, obsidian blades, jade figurines, and even carved wooden masks, were discovered by scientists after years of investigation. It seemed more like a message than a grave. What made the ancient builders take such drastic measures? What did they want to conceal or protect? According to some researchers, the tunnel was utilized for initiation ceremonies. According to others, it represented the world's creation, a legendary womb where monarchs and gods were created, and where the universe and mankind negotiated divine order. Mercury, which was formerly believed to be only poisonous, might have stood for water or the fluid barrier separating realms. Among all these sparkling pieces there was one recurring rumour. The Feathered Serpent was still there, not only as a story but also as a presence in the temple's geometry, murals, and sculptures. Waiting to be found again, it had coiled inward, deep into the city's bones, and we get closer to its message, which is etched in stone, sacrifice and shadow rather than words, with every dig, jawbone discovered, or golden decoration. We now have drones, ground-penetrating radar, and X-rays thanks to modern science. But one fact endures despite all of our resources. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent remains a disturbing memorial to a long-gone society, as well as a way of thinking that combined death, power, and the cosmos into one indestructible system. The temple still harbours secrets today. Visitors take pictures. Though the ground beneath their feet is steeped in more than 200 known human sacrifices and 1,000 untold stories, children run past the heads of the stone serpents. And the temple is still standing today. Its legacy encompasses not only architecture but also psychology, spirituality and culture. This contradictory deity of the sky and the ground, the Feathered Serpent, kept changing. His tale took on a softer tone when he was adopted by the Toltecs and subsequently reborn by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl. This reimagining of the serpent deity demonstrates how myths endure. He was the bringer of knowledge, the deity who cried for humanity, and the one who pledged to return. They change. Echoes of the Feathered Serpent can still be seen in literature, art, murals, and national identity in contemporary Mexico. The temple's picture can be found on government buildings, coinage, and stamps. It now represents mystery, pre-Columbian genius, and the wild, spiritual realm that once throbbed throughout Mesoamerica. However, there is another legacy that is less obvious and more unsettling. The feathered serpent's temple makes us face the cost of believing. It poses challenging queries, such as how far people will go to have a sense of spiritual connection. What occurs when religion and power are indistinguishable? Can terror and beauty coexist? In many respects, the temple is more than just a historical landmark. It is a mirror reflecting who we are, our insatiable curiosity about life after death, our need for purpose, and our ability to create incredibly beautiful monuments and smear them with blood. The temple teaches us that greatness comes with shadows, that civilizations can reach unimaginable heights while burying their secrets beneath the stones, and perhaps that is why we keep coming back, not just to visit but to understand, because we know deep down that the serpent is still watching, not to strike, but to remind us of who we were and who we might become before we spoke in words. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before writing was invented, even before language itself was born, early humans started to create something that could only be described as sound with intention, not speech, not melody, but rhythm. A hand slapping hollow bark, a stick tapping a stone, a foot stomping earth in time. The first drum beat was a beautiful moment that appeared somewhere in that old repetition. It was not referred to as music. Anthropologists have discovered evidence of rudimentary percussion instruments that date back more than 30,000 years. Although it didn't have a name, but it seemed like something like movement, communication, or emotion taking shape. Tree trunks, hollowed out gourds, stretched animal hides, and other natural materials were probably used to make these. Nothing ostentatious or maintained. However, these simple drums weren't toys or pointless diversions. They had legitimate functions such as warning, summoning, and connecting. Imagine if a tribe was dispersed throughout a thick forest, and one drum beat from afar alerted others to danger, the start of a festival, or the presence of the gods. The first drums weren't only instruments, the human body was extended by them. A pulse felt across a valley was externalized by a heartbeat. These ancient rhythms became a language of emotion, joy, grief, warning, and hope, all expressed in patterned sound rather than syllables or symbols. Drumming was not something you watched or listened to. Rather, it was something you did together, around fires, under stars, and in caves, where echoes caused the air to vibrate. The drum was alive before the first flutes were carved and before string instruments were imagined. It helped to bind us to the past, give ceremonial form, and bring people together into tribes. The drum thus became the first instrument used by humans and possibly the earliest symbol of group identification. People made things to beat, strike, and mark the occasion wherever they lived on Earth, because even in the absence of words, rhythm was essential to the early stages of human civilization. Drums were more than just instruments. The voices were holy. Every tribe, culture, and location on the planet created its own beat, but the goal, to communicate with the invisible, was almost the same. Rhythm was closely associated with life, death, and genealogy in Africa, where some of the world's first drums appeared. The djembe, a single tree-carved instrument wrapped in goatskin, was said to hold 3 spirits. The craftsman who brought the tree to life performed in circles, and it was carved from the animal whose hide gave it a voice. Not all rituals were accompanied by the djembe. It was the custom. Then there were the talking drums, which could imitate the tone and pitch of human speech. Long before telephone humans were already pounding their messages through the terrain and across the oceans, these drums were used in West Africa to transmit news, warnings, births, and deaths from one community to the next. The drum was regarded as a living thing by Native American tribes. In ceremonies to honor ancestors, call forth healing, or guide the souls of the deceased, the heartbeat of Mother Earth was played. Played by a group of drummers, the big powwow drum served as a communal pulse that brought people into harmony with nature and spirit. The Aboriginal people of Australia employed clapsticks and percussion stomps during the mythical period of creation known as sacred dream time. During the long, dark winters in the Arctic, Inuit shamans would strike frame drums to induce trance states in order to communicate with spirits or seek visions. These were not shows, these were stories, healing, survival, and a connection to the drum that should not be forgotten. Drumming was always communal and meant belonging. With no stage or sheet music, just bodies moving, hands striking, souls stirring, drums drew people together in sacred circles, synchronizing hearts and intentions. No matter where you were in the world, if you heard a drum in the distance, you knew that something holy was taking place that words could never adequately describe. The drum has always spoken, sometimes with consolation and other times with authority, from hallowed halls to brutal battlegrounds. Drums became instruments of dominance, of order, and of terror as human communities developed into kingdoms and empires. The first armies lacked megaphones and radios. In ancient China, commanders used a single resonant boom to signal a charge, retreat, or flanking movement. These enormous drums, known as bow drums, were struck to coordinate forces over vast terrains. These drums were purposeful in addition to being loud. Even in the midst of the pandemonium of war in Mesopotamia, trained troops were able to listen to temple drums, each of which had a specific meaning. During times of conflict, they reverberated over city walls, frightening foes with a deep, unrelenting thunder. They were also used to announce rulers and summon the populace. It was psychological warfare, not just percussion. The tympanum, a frame drum used in processions and by cults like the Cybele, was carried by the Romans when they marched. It was not a weapon of war like horns and standards, but it conveyed discipline, order, and symbolic strength. However, before battles, the world's first known military orchestras unleashed an overwhelming storm of drums, cymbals, and horns. The constant pounding of Davil double-headed bass drums and cursed giant kettle drums terrified the enemy forces. No army wielded drums quite like the Ottomans. According to some European reports, soldiers freeze in fear before they ever see the Ottomans, immobilized by the sound. In royal courts throughout Asia, Africa, and Europe, drum ensembles also served to enforce authority off the battlefield. They marked coronations, announced arrivals, and emphasized political rights. Even enslaved people in the Americas used drums as instruments of resistance on plantations. To beat a drum was to proclaim the presence of force. Rhythmic communication helped plan covert uprisings and preserved culture. Despite being persecuted, the drum remained unmute. Therefore, the drum has always conveyed the message, this is who rules, whether it was a sign of divine right, military discipline, or pure terror. This is the rhythm of power, and this is who marches. Their rhythms changed in shape, purpose, and philosophy as civilizations spread out across continents. Drums evolved into instruments of ceremony, mysticism, and accuracy in the East. With two universes, two paths, and one heartbeat, they eventually turned to orchestral grandeur and military might in the West. The drum evolved into a revered instrument of heavenly language in India. The tabla served as more than just an accompaniment instrument in classical music and devotional performances thanks to its clear tones and flowing elegance. It was dialogue. Every stroke had a syllabic identification, a name, and a meaning. There was more to Indian drumming than merely percussion. It was poetry and speech. The tabla player, who had been trained for decades, was more than just a musician. He was a rhythm linguist. The taiko drum became a huge ceremonial instrument in Japan and was used in theatre, battle, and Shinto ceremonies. Taiko demanded physical discipline in addition to technical proficiency. The drummers made precise movements like fighters. The thunderous taiko reverberated through mountain valleys, their stances grounded like warriors at festivals said to summon the gods to earth and ward off evil spirits. In Indonesia, gamelan orchestras headed by the kendang drum hypnotically accompanied musicians and dancers during religious temple rituals. These rich, interconnected and heavenly rhythms were a global oral representation of cosmic harmony. Drums were a different story in Europe. During the Middle Ages they served primarily as timekeepers, discipline enforcers, and signalling devices for warriors. Drums didn't start to be used in formal music until the Renaissance and Baroque periods, but even then they were only used as timpani in the background, roaring beneath royal trumpets or resonating in grand cathedrals. Two philosophies can be seen in this divergence. In the East, rhythm was associated with breathing, chanting, and meditation, and it was seen as both art and spirit. In the West, it was viewed as a tool for rallying, marching, and measuring. However, both recognized the drum's fundamental ability to influence time, set pace, elevate ritual, and unite people in ways that go beyond language, whether they are East or West, sacred or strategic. The drum has always been at the center, always speaking and listening, whether in temples atop mountains or in clearings in the jungle, or in cathedrals lit by candles or by desert fires. Long before the spread of organized religion, already rhythm served as a sacred language, a means of invocation, prayer, and transcendence. drums were more than simply instruments in Africa. They were spiritual creatures. For instance, the batar drum was utilised in Yoruba traditions to speak with the gods, ancestor spirits, and orishas inside. Performers were not drummers, they served as priests, invoking the gods to come and dance among the living. Their beats were encoded prayers. Every pattern served a function, every beat has a purpose. The drum is even seen in the hands of gods in Hinduism. Shiva, in his avatar as Nataraja, is seen dancing the cosmic dance of creation and destruction while holding a small hourglass-shaped drum called the Damaru. The beat of this drum symbolises the universe's movement from emptiness to form, from sound to silence. The heartbeat of the drum is holy. The ritual frame drum is used in Buddhist meditation sessions and monastic chants. Like a metronome for the psyche, its gentle, calm blows direct consciousness and breath. It merely reminds the practitioner to repeatedly return to the present moment. It is neither loud nor combative. The drum is not only used to accompany prayer. Indigenous tribes throughout the Americas utilize it in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. The slow, steady beat of the drum resembles the rhythm of the womb and helps participants enter trance states or contact with ancestral spirits. The prayer is it. Regardless of the faith, the ritual or the god invoked, the drum has always been there, not as decoration, but as a vessel for energy, intention, and the mysteries we cannot speak. Because when words fail in worship, rhythm remains, and the divine always listens. For thousands of years, drums were solitary instruments, one body, one sound, and one purpose. This is true even in Christianity, where rhythm was often subdued, but they still found a sacred role in gospel traditions, especially in African American churches. However, a revolutionary event took place in factories, streets, and music halls during the height of the industrial era. Multiple drums were no longer strewn across a stage as percussion was reimagined in the early 20th century. Together, they created a brand new instrument known as the drum set. It began as a result of need. The late 19th century saw the need for multiple percussionists to play the bass, drum, snare, cymbals and woodblocks in theatre and military bands. Due to limited space and financial constraints, drummers started combining instruments into a single playable arrangement. By 1909, the first bass drum pedal was created, allowing a drummer to use one foot to beat a large drum, freeing up their hands to perform other tasks. Over the ensuing decades, the concept gained popularity, and drummers began using ride cymbals, cowbells, toms, and hi-hats to create a configuration that could replicate a whole percussion section from a single seat. It turned out to be more than just a tool. It was the throne of a drummer. Jazz then emerged in smoky bars and underground dance halls in Chicago and New Orleans, where the drum set sprang to life. Jazz drummers were more than just timekeepers. They used swing, sensitivity, and syncopation to play the kit like a voice. The drum kit became a lead instrument because to legends like Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa, storytelling evolved from rhythm. The drum kit became louder, heavier, and more potent as jazz developed into rock. Drummers like John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Keith Moon pushed the boundaries of endurance and inventiveness during the 1960s and 1970s, when kits expanded to include several toms, splash cymbals, and double bass pedals. The background no longer included the drummer. The engine was him or her. Gospel churches, EDM stages, punk garages, and world tours all use drum sets these days. Despite the popularity of computerized kits and drum machines, the physicality of a live drum kit, the sticks, the skins, and the sweat remains invaluable. One drummer may speak with 10 voices simultaneously, and it is a representation of modern rhythm, a synthesis of centuries of innovation and tradition. From continent to continent and culture to culture, the drum has taken on innumerable shapes, each with its own unique character, sound, and function. Just as the world beats in thousands of dialects, so do its drums. These are cultural symbols rather than merely instruments. For many years, the gemba has been a focal point of community events since it was made using local materials, moulded by local hands, and steeped in West African daily rhythms. It uses deep bass tones and forceful slaps to communicate, which are ideal for narrative and impromptu dialogue. The fundamental pulse, a rhythmic anchor around which others might dance, is provided by the dun-dun next to it. A drum group is more than simply music in Africa. The diebucha is a goblet-shaped drum made of clay or metal that produces sharp, fast-paced rhythms that are vital to belly dancing and classical Arabic music. It represents a dialogue between the living and the spirits of the Middle East's ancestors. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, its crisp and expressive voice demands precision from its player and movement from its listeners. Drums, on the other hand, tell a different story, one that is born out of fusion and resilience. The fusion of African, indigenous and Spanish influences is shown in the conga, bongo and timbalus. The holy bata drums are utilised in Santeria ceremonies in Cuba. The thunder of cerdo and cuica propel samba parades through the streets, bringing joy to protest, prayer and carnival. Each drum speaks a divine language associated with the orishas in Brazil. South Indian classical music is dominated by the mridangam, while North Indian classical music is dominated by the tabla. The distinction between beat and melody is blurred by the accuracy of these drums, which are tuned to pitch. Every finger movement counts. Centuries of tradition are embodied in every stroke. One of the earliest instruments in human history, the frame drum may be found in everything from Irish bodhran to Persian dap, as well as in shamanic instruments and folk ensembles that use brushes, mallets or fingertips. It is evidence that simplicity itself may be revered. Every drum represents the spirit of its people, whether it is used for guidance, dancing, healing, ritual or revolt. Because the earth still reverberates with rhythm wherever you go, the world drum family is not only different but also universal. Their rhythms convey location, history and identity. As the 20th century came to an end, drumming started to shift in texture rather than beat. Sweaty palms, wooden poles and calloused fingertips started to make way for circuits, pads and software as the physical gave way to the programmable. The era of electronic drumming was upon us. It started in the 1970s with crude drum machines such as the Roland CR78 and Rhythmicon, which were early gadgets that mimicked simple rhythms using analog circuits. They sounded artificial and even unpleasant at first, but musicians noticed something else: control, consistency, and limitless potential. Then a revolution took place. Roland introduced the TR-808 in 1980. Hip-hop, techno, electro and trap were all influenced by this drum machine, which is so famous for its deep, booming kick and sharp snare that it helped define entire genres. The focus shifted from imitating acoustic drums to producing whole new sounds. Tools advanced along with digital audio. Drummers were able to perform organically while triggering thousands of generated or sampled tones with electronic drum sets such as the Roland Feed drums. Now, musicians could switch drum kits at the touch of a button, record without microphones, and practice in silence. Computers also brought with them digital audio workstations, DAWs like as FL Studio, Ableton and Logic. With a laptop, anyone could now create intricate rhythms by stacking kicks, snares, hi-hats, and sub-bass into expansive sonic structures. MIDI pad finger drumming evolved into a separate art form. Some were concerned that this change would herald the end of traditional drumming, replacing human emotion with icy accuracy. However, that did not occur. Rather, hybridity surfaced. Samples and triggers were added to the kits of acoustic drummers. Producers began combining machine beats with human-played drums, and the organic and synthetic found a common ground. The past was not erased by digital drums. They made it up, and we now live in a world where only one person exists. Additionally, it is possible to create rhythms in a bedroom that historically required whole orchestras, allowing for the sampling, twisting, and revitalization of ancient African, Asian, and American grooves on neon-lit dance floors. From ancient fire circles to contemporary concert halls, from sacred rituals to digital dance floors, the drum has always been our oldest and most enduring voice. The tools have changed, but the goal has remained the same: to move bodies, to shape time, to make silence speak across all eras, empires, and technological advancements. It's about being connected to something greater, to ourselves and to one another. It is the heartbeat that all of us share, both literally and figuratively, since even before we are born, while still inside the womb, the first rhythm we hear is that of our mother's heart, steady, secure, and alive, and we follow that pattern relentlessly once life starts. Through worship and protest, through happiness and conflict, the drum has remained by our side. It has risen with rebels and marched with kings. It has reverberated in subway tunnels and temples. Since it is a language that speaks directly to the body, bones and blood rather than through the mind, it may be understood in any language. We drum in times of sorrow, in times of joy, in times of celebration, and in the quiet times in between, we drum to remind ourselves of who we are now. Percussion is still developing. There are indigenous villages retaining old drumming traditions despite all obstacles, stadium drummers bringing crowds together, youngsters pounding pots and pans with natural joy, and handpan street performers weaving new age rhythms on city corners. The human soul behind a single imperfect beat cannot be replicated by any algorithm, even though artificial intelligence is learning rhythm. This is because rhythm is felt rather than just counted, and perhaps that is why the drum has endured through empires and trends. We all secretly long for the anchor of time, the shared pulse that reminds us that we are all here together. The drum is not a thing of the past. There will always be something deeply rooted about skin on skin, stick on hide, palm on wood, a beat, a breath, a beginning, regardless of how sophisticated our instruments get or how virtual our experiences get. It serves as a reminder that rhythmic movement, listening, feeling and playing were all part of our original design, and that as long as humanity exists, the drum will never be quiet. Prior to Manhattan turning into a steel and glass wilderness, it was an island of shadows, cast by sloping rooftops and church steeples rather than towers. The skyline hardly existed in the early 19th century. Because gravity had the last word and not a lack of ambition, the city clung to the southern tip of the island, a dense cluster of brick townhouses, timber-framed stores, and dirt-packed roadways. Buildings rarely rose higher than 5 or 6 stories. With stone and brick, height came at a hefty cost, and the taller the building, the more weight it could support. In order to sustain the top levels, the walls had to be thicker at the bottom, which reduced the amount of space inside and necessitated the use of massive foundations. Furthermore, heavy was not economically viable. Thus, the city expanded northward in a horizontal fashion, following a grid that was one of the most ambitious urban plans of its era, designed in 1811. Manhattan, however, had a secret weapon hidden beneath that grid, beneath the soil and cobblestone layers. Some of the biggest buildings in human history would eventually be supported by the granite spine that ran beneath the island. It was bedrock, deep, dense and unyielding. But for now it was waiting, silent and unaltered. Early Manhattan life was grounded but boisterous. The harbour was humming with commerce. Horses clattered through small alleyways while ships lined the piers. The island filled with energy, the economy expanded and immigration increased, but the city still hugged the ground. The sky did not change. Churches were the only true vertical pronouncements. The most notable is Trinity Church, which was the tallest building in New York for a while, with a 280-foot spire finished in 1846. But even that, more of a symbol than a skyline. Nobody realized at the time that the future of skylines would not be constrained by the earth, and would be moulded by iron, steel and vision rather than stone or wood. The object would ascend well above it. The scene was being laid, but Manhattan was not yet a metropolis of towers. The island was prepared. The skyline will soon start to stretch for generations as the dream took shape. The best architect in Manhattan was gravity. It kept cities level, buildings low, and human aspiration grounded in the ground. However, 2 discoveries would completely alter the skyline in the middle of the 19th century. Buildings were raised by one, and people by another. The first was in 1852, when Elisha Otis, an inventor, performed a spectacular demonstration at the Crystal Palace in New York to introduce his groundbreaking safety elevator. High above a crowd, Otis stood on a platform. He gave the order to cut the rope. Despite the audience's gasps, the platform remained upright. In that one amazing instant, Otis altered the rules of height by locking the lift in place using a concealed mechanism. Up until then, buildings' upper floors were the most affordable. Nobody wanted to go up the stairs. However, the vertical city suddenly made financial sense as elevators were made safe and useful, turning those top floors into premium space that offered light, air and status. However, simply being able to carry people upstairs wasn't enough. Structures continued to rely on load-bearing walls, which became heavier and more unwieldy as elevation increased. The steel skeleton, the second innovation, arrived at that point. Engineers started employing steel frames to bear the weight of buildings in the 1880s and 1890s. which made outside walls into light drapes rather than bulky structural supports. By using steel frame construction, architects were able to build as high as the structure will support. Height was now no longer a concern. It was a plan. The technology was here, the resources were available, and Manhattan was the ideal canvas because of its strong foundation and thriving economy. The island's constrained topography promoted vertical thinking, and because it was a financial hub, everyone wanted their name to appear in the clouds, including newspapers and banks. The sky was accessible thanks to the elevator. The sky could be built because of the steel skeleton. Together, they changed more than simply the architecture. They changed the definition of a city. The race would now start uphill rather than outward. By the end of the 1800s, New York City had outgrown its sprawl. It desired to fly. It was full on the ground. With steel frame buildings and the elevator already in place, Manhattan turned into a test site and the skyline into a battleground for ambition, as the streets were crowded and there was nowhere else to build. The first shots were fired in the 1890s at the New York World Building, which was 20 stories above Park Row and housed Joseph Pulitzer's newspaper empire. It was the world's tallest office building. Briefly, the Park Row buildings, which stood 391 feet apiece, took the title next in 1899, not to be outdone. The new tower was a statement of ambition as much as riches, declaring that we are the future meant building higher. Steel giants soon sprung up in the skyline. When the Singer Building was finished in 1908, it was 612 feet tall, making it the world's tallest building and the first to overtake Trinity Church's spire, which had held the record for more than 50 years. Even so, it wouldn't endure. The Woolworth Building, which was created by architect Cass Gilbert and paid for with cash by retail tycoon Frank W. Woolworth, claimed the crown in 1913. Rising 792 feet over 55 floors, it was known as the Cathedral of Commerce and was a magnificent example of neo-Gothic grandeur. In addition to being towering, the Woolworth was imposing and served as a sermon in architecture about America's ascent to prominence in the modern world. However, this was more than just a competition amongst architects. It was a battle of branding. Businesses and organizations fought for the highest, most recognizable structures, towers that would leave their names permanently etched in the sky. Every new height served as a headline, and each silhouette served as a metaphor. The skyscraper turned into the ultimate billboard, permanent, massive, and unavoidable, with the ceaseless beat of progress beneath it all. Foundations were excavated into granite using steam shovels. The skyline was no longer hypothetical as immigrants and iron workers, without harnesses and with only determination and grit, balanced on beams hundreds of feet in the air as riveters hammered steel day and night. It was rising. It was real. The skyline started to do more than just climb. It started to dance as the 1920s raced through Manhattan. This was the Art Deco era, when style and height were important aspects of architecture. New York's buildings became symbols of movement, light, and vitality as the Jazz Age infused steel and stone with grace. The most spectacular of them all was the Chrysler Building, which was commissioned by auto tycoon Walter Chrysler and stood 1,046 feet tall when it was finished in 1930, momentarily holding the title of largest structure in the world. The tower was more than just a symbol of business prosperity. It was a design symphony. With its curves, chevrons, and machine-age ornamentation, its stainless steel spire, which was constructed covertly and lifted into position overnight, glistened in the sunlight like a crown. The ornamental eagles, which were fashioned after hood ornaments, protruded from the corners like guardians of the future. The sky wasn't only scraped by the Chrysler Building, it was tempted. The race was far from over, though. There was another Titan growing a few blocks distant. Completed in 1931, in the midst of the Great Depression, the Empire State Building rose to a height of 1,250 feet, stealing the title from Chrysler and keeping it for almost 40 years. Constructed in just 410 days, with thousands of workers toiling through steel dust, wind and snow, the Empire State was more than just a structure. It was a statement. While much of the nation suffered, New York persevered, with its buildings reflecting the era's dual identity. Elegant yet assertive, hopeful yet competitive, Manhattan moved forward. The paradoxes of the era were encapsulated in the Art Deco style, which was modern yet mythological, geometric yet elegant. Towers were more than simply useful. They were sculptures that glowed at night like lights of promise. But beneath all that glitz, there was a reason. The barons and moguls who constructed these skyscrapers had goals beyond making money. They desired a lasting legacy, a spot in history and the skyline. The outline of Manhattan had developed by the late 1930s. The city was no longer solely a financial hub. It was a skyline that yelled development rather than whispering it. It was a cathedral of aspiration. Manhattan's skyline underwent a transformation following World War II, becoming less decorative and more business. Straight lines, steel and glass replaced the beauty of Art Deco. New York served as the headquarters of America's newfound worldwide dominance. In response, the skyline changed to include monuments of efficiency rather than ornamental spires. The United Nations headquarters, a brash, boxy glass tower with short marble wings on either side, rose on the East River in 1952. It signalled a change in tone, becoming more diplomatic, global and futuristic. It was more than a structure. The Lever House in 1952 and the Seagram Building in 1958, two iconic examples of the international style, followed, and it was an architectural statement about international order in the atomic age that set the tone for what would come. These towers, with their steel frames and curtain walls of reflected glass, were purposefully simple, devoid of ornamentation and emotion. They didn't resemble castles or churches. They appeared to be precise, cutting-edge, and brutally pragmatic machines. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe's Seagram Building had a particularly significant impact. Its open plaza and bronze-tinted glass uniform grid created a new kind of urban presence by projecting authority, discipline, and order rather than impressing with embellishments. This was the pinnacle of corporate architecture. Cold, elegant, and powerful. Businesses flourished, and the skyline followed suit. America's largest enterprises, banks, media outlets, and law firms have all centered in Midtown. There was no beauty competition among these new towers. They fought for presence, location, and square footage. The gargoyles and towering spires on the horizon have vanished. Mirrored monoliths, faceless giants that reflected not only the clouds, but also Wall Street's aspirations, stood in their place. Despite their simplicity and stillness, these buildings conveyed a lot of information. They described a nation fixated on development, accuracy, and modernism. The corporate period was defined by them. Around the world, cameras are influencing how cities appear and feel. One thing, though, persisted despite all of this steel and glass. The skyline was still a symbol, albeit one that now evoked strength rather than beauty. New York was already a vertical masterpiece by the late 1960s, but it could have been far better. That vision came to life at Manhattan's southernmost point, where two identical skyscrapers will soon permanently change the city's skyline. The World Trade Center's Twin Towers, designed as a center for international trade, were audacious, divisive, and unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey oversaw the World Trade Center project, and architect Minoru Yamasaki created the building's radical minimalist form, which featured vertical lines, aluminum cladding, and no setbacks. With a height of over 1,160 feet, each tower would dwarf all previous structures. The goal was more than just architectural, it was ideological, a declaration of global interconnectedness, and a new capitalist temple. In order to create space, construction started in 1966. There was a whole row on the local radio, one of the most difficult engineering achievements of its era. The Twin Towers were not universally adored when they were finished in 1973. The foundations needed a groundbreaking technology called the slurry wall, which allowed engineers to build deep into the soft riverbed while keeping back the Hudson. Critics have referred to them as boxy or sterile. The disappearance of the elaborate towers of the past was lamented by others. However, the towers were seen by many as a symbol of strength, confidence, and authority. Unlike the Chrysler, they did not dance with the sky. Unlike the Empire State, they did not taper. Standing sturdy as two pillars of magnitude and certainty, the World Trade Center evolved into more than just a building. It became a global representation of American power, unity, and business. For almost 30 years, the Twin Towers dominated Lower Manhattan, drawing tourists from all over the world to the observation decks, eat at windows on the world, or just gaze up in wonder from the plaza below. While other cities constructed larger structures, none of them carried the iconic weight of those two skyscrapers rising side by side. They gave the skyline balance and seriousness, anchoring it. The skyline had transformed once more, but this time with massive ambition rather than adornment or artistry. Violence and smoke, not cranes or construction, altered the Manhattan skyline forever on the morning of September 11th, 2001. The World Trade Center's twin towers fell into twisted steel, fire and dust in less than 2 hours. The two pillars that formerly marked Lower Manhattan were gone, and thousands of lives were lost. The onslaught did not only target individuals or structures. The symbols and the things those skyscrapers represented, trade, modernism, freedom and ambition, were attacked. The two towers had delineated the island's southernmost point for many years. Their simple, monolithic shapes had come to symbolize New York. Lower Manhattan was now a burning raw wound, where there had once been height and light, and where skyline had been broken in the days and weeks that followed, there was only void, and that absence reverberated. Pictures of the skyline appeared empty. For the first time in a century, Manhattan wasn't growing. The classic silhouette was shattered, and the area that had once throbbed with global energy was referred to as Ground Zero. The time was morning. In addition to the city's grief, steel workers, firefighters, police officers, and volunteers flocked to the site to help recover rather than build. The debris was removed, and lives were respected. In a metropolis that is constantly moving forward, the clang of iron was replaced with silence. This was a lengthy breath held in collective sorrow, a forced pause. But New York did what it always did, even in grief. It raised its head. Rebuilding discussions were complex, passionate, and political. What ought to be the tower's replacement? Do you think anything will rise again? Would it be possible to restore the skyline without undoing the damage? The hole in the earth served as a reminder of what was taken and what was left for years. Slowly but surely it turned into a hallowed place. Appeared. Drafts of the designs were made. Steel and cranes came back, not to make the tragedy go away, but to build something new next to it. But one thing was evident before anything was constructed. The skyline was no longer merely a representation of aspiration or might. The story wasn't finished. It had evolved into a memorial, a silhouette moulded by both tragedy and victory. After the destruction, a city that was recognized for its quickness, ambition and mobility stopped. Not to give up, but to rethink. After September 11th, rebuilding the Manhattan skyline was an identity issue as much as an architectural one. What would take the Twin Towers' place? Could anything? Slowly the answers emerged. Daniel Libeskin's design was chosen in 2003 for the location of the New World Trade Center. It was more than height. It was about recovery, remembrance, and rejuvenation. Commercial space, parks, public memorials, transit, and light would all be incorporated into the plan. There was no going back to the past. It was a declaration of possibilities. In the center of it all was a brand new skyscraper called One World Trade Center, formerly known as the Freedom Tower. Rising from the northwest corner of Ground Zero, the structure would reach a height of 1776 feet, which was chosen to reflect the year that America gained its independence and make it the tallest structure in the Western Hemisphere. However, patriotism wasn't the only factor here. In spite of loss, it was about defiance and rising again. The One World Trade Center, a crystal obelisk encased in glistening glass, opened its doors in 2014. Construction started in 2006. It made no attempt to emulate the past. It provided a fresh perspective on both literal and symbolic pondering. Depending on the light, the structure transforms as the sky gets brighter, darker, or vanishes. It is presence without of conceit. With the names of the fallen engraved in bronze and a continuous waterfall in each of the two cavernous voids where the original towers once stood, the 9/11 memorial opened next to it in 2011. It is an integral element of the city's soul, not merely its skyline. It took years for the new skyline to develop. The 3WTC, 4WTC, and 7WTC towers, all sleek, contemporary and functional, rose. When taken as a whole, they depict a city that has been transformed rather than just rebuilt. What was lost was not simply replaced in New York. It changed. It reminded the world of something fundamentally American and human, while paying tribute to the past and constructing for the future. Today, the Manhattan skyline is more than just a collection of skyscrapers. You can destroy a city, but you can't stop it from rising. It is a living representation of aspiration, tenacity, and the American dream in general. No other silhouette in the entire globe is as significant. It is ingrained in memory, history, and popular culture. People will know it right away even if you only use 5 lines to sketch it. It narrates the tale of fearless iron workers and engineers, architects who envisioned spires that pierced clouds, and immigrants who travelled across oceans to assist in their construction. It talks on the perpetual upheaval of New York itself, as well as risk, reward, and reinvention. No one has ever finished it, and no one ever will. The skyline is dynamic and ever-changing. It has been pushed even beyond in recent years, but not in Lower Manhattan. Super-thin residential buildings like 432 Park Avenue, Central Park Tower, and 111 West 57th Street now stand like needles above Midtown, as the vertical race proceeded uptown along Billionaires Row this time. These skyscrapers, designed for the ultra-wealthy, are engineering marvels that are pencil-thin and wind-tested. Critics see them as blazing examples of inequity. Others view them as wonders of contemporary aspiration, whereas the skyline now extends further west, reflecting the city's shifting demands and aspirations. A completely new neighbourhood has emerged in Hudson Yards, with sparkling glass towers, public art, and corporate headquarters emerging where rail yards formerly stretched. The skyline, however, clings to its history despite its expansion. One World Trade Center remains serious and proud, the Chrysler still shines at dawn, and the Empire State Building still sparkles at night. What does the skyline remember? Even while it reaches for the next thing, it came first. The skyline characterizes New York more than any monument or statue, both in terms of form and meaning. A metropolis of millions mirrored in steel and glass, it is a location where humanity has repeatedly dared to build higher through booms, busts, wars, and wounds. It is more than just a boundary for the city. Because the sky has never been the limit in Manhattan, it signifies the beginning of dreaming,